Alright, welcome back. SimCFI here. We're ready to take off. We have completed all of the takeoff checks. We make sure we clear the area of the traffic. Sometimes you can do a little 360 right here in the ground. Today, from this runway, we can see the entire traffic pattern. So it's runway 33. It's a left-hand traffic pattern. So they'll be coming down this way. So area is clear of traffic. And just before we take off, just wanted to show you that we get the takeoff speeds from the manual. So the A2A airplanes come with a really nice manual, and on page 64 for the Cherokee, list all of your speeds over here, and these are all the same speeds for the Cherokee 140 as well. So we're going to climb out at our best rate of climb speed, known as VY, and that's going to be 85 miles per hour. Typically the airplane will start coming off the ground right around 60, 65 miles an hour, and then we'll let it accelerate to 85 and climb up from there. The main difference of this plane and the Cherokee 140 is really just the horsepower. This plane's going to climb a little bit better, so the pitch angle is going to be a little bit higher. Alright, so let's go ahead and take off. So we make sure no one else is coming up here, so we don't just cut anyone off really quickly. Coming up to the hold short line. The hold short line is this line over here. It's got two solid lines and two dashed lines. So typically when you're on the solid side, it means you want to do a double check before you take off. So at a non-towered airport like this, where there's no control tower, you don't have to stop here. You just make sure you look left and right for traffic, make sure it's clear. Never want to take off or land with anybody else on the runway. And you also don't want to line up and wait at a non-towered airport. So if someone just lands right in front of you, don't pull out into the runway until they're actually clear onto the taxiway or taken off again. At a towered airport, you have to get a takeoff clearance before you cross this line. So at non-towered airports, the radio is not required, but definitely should be. So the radio call will go like this: Lincoln traffic, Cherokee 09er Whiskey, taking off 33 with the left downwind departure, Lincoln. And we'll explain the traffic pattern in another video. Right now we're just going to worry about taking off. And so we're going to do a south departure going over to Folsom Lake. So we're going to get the airplane lined up in center line. A lot of times you can just follow this yellow line right out there. Center line is the center of the runway. You see these dashed lines going down the runway. The runway numbers are labeled for their magnetic heading. You see we're on a heading of 330, and you see the heading bug lines up with 330. So we're on the correct runway. Let's go ahead and apply full power. Make sure the RPM gets to where it needs to be. And check the gauges, make sure the engine gauges are in the green, airspeed is alive, and it's time to pull back. Give it some right rudder, see the right rudder I'm giving it. Now let that nose down a little bit, let the speed build up to 85, and then we'll pitch the nose up just a little bit more. A little bit too much right rudder, we'll come off on that. The right rudder is necessary because of the four left turning tendencies: P factor, torque, spiraling slipstream, and gyroscopic precession. You'll want to go read about those in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge under the aerodynamics section. Alright, so now we're climbing out, we're maintaining 85. So the best way to do this is to learn where to put the nose against the horizon. Now it's a little windy today, but you see how the horizon line is coming through, kind of where the engine cowling and the panel meet right there. And you kind of look on both sides, see what this sight picture looks like. Okay? And then you see that gives you about 85 miles an hour. So we don't have to stare at the instruments to get 85 and all that. We just look outside, give it full power, pitch the nose up to this point right here, and the speed will come to 85 by itself. Here we're checking in the direction of our turns. Roll wings level, look both ways for traffic. We're already above the pattern altitude now. Let's keep climbing. That's Lincoln Airport, there's Lincoln. We're going to climb up to 3,000 feet. So from here, since we're high enough, we can just keep turning and depart mid-field from the airport. And sometimes, especially when you have more powerful planes, you don't always have to climb at VY. See, I'm at 100 miles an hour now. This plane just climbs really well. But see, otherwise you look outside, you just keep that point on the spot. Let me reset the views here. Alright, so now we're above 1,000 feet above the ground. Let's do our climb checklist. And that's really just 3 things for this plane. We're going to turn the fuel pump off, the landing light off, and check the fuel pressure in the middle here to make sure it's holding in the green, which it is. So now we'll keep climbing at VY or at some faster airspeed. So when you're climbing at a faster airspeed like this, typically that's called a cruise climb, and that's good for the engine too. It gives it more cooling, keeps the oil temperature a little bit more stabilized. A little more important when your temperatures start getting up to 40 degrees. And on the Cherokee, the outside air temperature gauge is right up here. And so right now we're at about 15 Celsius at this altitude. So it's not too hot yet, but in real world, it's going to be 100 degrees in a few days. Not looking forward to that. Alright, so as we're coming up to 3,000, we're maintaining our pitch attitude like this. And now we have to shove the nose down to get a level flight pitch attitude. Right around here. So what I'm doing is to do what I just did, I'm just looking outside and I know where to put the nose. I'm going to get the power down a little bit. But as you can see on the heading indicator, the orange bar is level with the horizon. You see the altimeter is not really moving anymore. Let's get it back down a little bit. But this is your level flight pitch attitude. So what I do in the real airplane is I have you hold your fingers up here kind of near the dash and see how many fingers you have between the nose and the horizon. So otherwise in the simulator, just see how much distance you have here. You know, maybe see, where the screws line up. Whatever reference point from the airplane to outside. This is your level flight pitch attitude. Getting these visual pitch attitudes is a very important skill to learn early on. So, once you memorize that distance, if you see the nose creep up like this, you know you're going to start climbing. And see, there we go. So to fix it, if you want to get back to 3,000, you have to get the nose down briefly to a descending pitch attitude, and then bring it back up to that level flight pitch attitude right there, and then you stop it. You can do all that without looking at the instruments, and you really do want to refine that skill. Some ways to do that in the simulator is to just tilt your viewer up like that, and you can practice all your pitch attitudes like that. So you climb, and you catch it, so you bring it back down to level right there, and the altimeter stops moving again. In the real airplane, sometimes I just take the checklist and cover up the instruments. It's a fun little exercise. Alright, so now this whole time though, I've been having to hold the yoke forward to keep the nose down like this. So let's get it back down to 3,000. Okay, that's good. Look outside, establish that level flight pitch attitude. It's all about the pitch attitudes outside. So now, while looking outside and keeping your left hand on the yoke, you take your right hand and you come up to the trim wheel and you move it counterclockwise for a nose down trim. So if you're having to hold the yoke forward, you're trying to force it down more, you need to give it nose down trim. So I'm giving it nose down trim. So what you do is you keep looking outside to keep that level flight pitch attitude, and you keep moving the trim wheel forward until you no longer have to hold the control forward. So once you can let go of the yoke here, and I'll show that again, I'll just get it trimmed out. So what you're going to see is me testing the pressure on the yoke like this. And let's hold the altitude we have. We're looking outside at the pitch attitude. And I'm giving it nose down trim, kind of testing the pressure, seeing it, and eventually I trim it enough to where I can let go of the yoke. And the plane flies itself. We got some turbulence, but for the most part we're keeping the altitude, maybe a little nudge forward. And so see, the trim is in a new spot. So the key to trimming is to keep your focus outside, keep that level flight pitch attitude, and you just keep trimming until you're no longer holding the pressure. And that is exactly the job of trim, is to relieve those control pressures. Another way to think about trim is you're trimming for a specific airspeed. So when we were climbing at 85 miles per hour. Once we leveled off, as you can see, we're up to 125 miles per hour. When you're trimmed out for a slow speed, that's going to bring the nose up. So to trim for a faster airspeed, you trim nose down. A couple different ways of looking at it, but that's really what's going on. You're always trimming for a specific airspeed. So here's quiz time. If I pull the power back to idle, what's going to happen to the nose? When you reduce the power, you're going to slow down. And when you slow down, the nose is going to go down because the airplane is trimmed for 125 miles an hour. It's going to try to find 125 miles an hour. So let's recover from that. Let's add the power. Let's climb back up. To do that, you look outside, give it full power, establish that climbing pitch attitude right about here. And in a few seconds, we're going to look down and we're going to see the airspeed indicator is going to be right around 85 miles an hour. There we go, pretty close. Depends on the conditions. Alright, so we've gone through 3,000. Let's level off at 3,200. So about 50 feet prior, right about there, you start establishing your level flight pitch attitude. Right about there. Let the speed build for a second. Start reducing the power. And there we go. Once that speed gets to 125, it'll be trimmed, because right now the nose wants to drop. Let's get the power up a little bit. We'll accelerate to 125. I haven't touched the trim since that whole exercise. So as long as we're at 125 miles an hour, the trim should be perfect. So I'm letting go of the yoke now, and it's doing pretty well. See, it's back in its trimmed condition. So level flight pitch attitude we can see by looking outside like this. You can also see it by looking out to the wingtips. Kind of look at the distance we have between the wingtip and the horizon. See, it's kind of the same on both sides. If you're looking out this way, see what the sight picture looks like here. You want to see what all these sight pictures look like from different angles. In the real world, you use the peripheral vision a little bit more. And so same thing with your climbing pitch attitude. If the plane is climbing, you see the angle of the wing to the horizon changes. And now if you want to get into a descent, it's just going to be nose down more. So if this is your level flight pitch attitude, just let the nose down, right about there, like a whole handful, about 5 fingers in the real world, and it gets you a good descending pitch attitude. And that's what it looks like out to the sides. And now see, when I come over here, if I see that wingtip up, I know I'm turning left a little bit. So you just bring it back down. So you can see all this stuff visually. Okay, we're coming up to Folsom Lake, and this is where we'll do our practice area for all of the maneuvers we're going to be learning. So this lesson we learned about climbing and trim. Oh, we got to cover turning too. So another important lesson to learn straight away is your use of the rudders, the rudder pedals. So when making turns now, let's get into a cruise flight here, level flight. If we want to make a turn to the left, we want to look left, make sure it's clear of traffic, and then we can get this yoke back up here. So we turn the yoke left to roll the airplane. Now, as we bank the airplane, you're going to notice the nose is going to want to drop. And you see it on the altimeter and a vertical speed. So when you make a turn, not only do we turn the yoke left, we also have to hold the yoke back a little bit of back pressure on the yoke to hold the nose up in that level flight pitch attitude as we're turning. Now another thing we got to do with the rudder, if I make turns like this, you'll see the nose kind of slides left and right a little bit. It's kind of sloppy. You can also see it in the ball. The ball is going to the left, and it goes out to the right. And that means you need to use rudder. Because what's happening, let's get this. When you're turning the yoke to the left, it raises the left aileron, and it lowers the right aileron. So they move inversely. When you bank the airplane, when you lower the aileron, it creates lift. When you create lift, you create drag. So if we're trying to turn left, but there's drag on the right side, it kind of makes the nose like slip out to the right before it turns like that. And so you have to use rudder to correct for what's called adverse yaw. Yaw is direction about the vertical axis, so adverse yaw is yaw in the direction that you don't want it to go. So, turning uses all three flight controls. You turn the yoke left, you pitch back a little bit, and you also give it a little bit of left rudder. Just a little bit, not a whole lot. Now, when you want to roll out of the turn, you have to give it right rudder, right aileron, and relax the back pressure. And then when you're level, you let go of all the controls, and the plane flies nice and trimmed, for the most part. Got some turbulence. Okay? So use of rudder in the turn, both rolling into the turn, and when you want to roll out of the turn. A good exercise, focus a point in the distance. Again, if you turn without rudder, the nose slides around. When you turn with rudder, the nose stays a little bit more centered. That means you're using the proper amount of rudder entering into the turns. Alright, we'll see you in the next flight.